Good afternoon, Rowan. I didn't mean to snarl. Snarling meant I was slowly becoming exactly what they wanted. But when Kaz Delacroix strode into Bolivia's house basement carrying a metal tray with my mediocre lunch, I couldn't resist playing into their game. My head snapped up, an animalistic hiss escaped my mouth, drool seeping down my chin. It was becoming progressively harder to stay human when my surroundings were akin to a dungeon. Fuck. I was so hungry. Thinking about Nin, about her malleable flesh that was so salty and yet sweet, was fucking with my head. I needed to eat, but my body was rejecting everything, even Nin. According to the moon freaks, the more I refused to accept their position as king, the less likely my body was going to survive. The chains wrapped around my wrists and ankles were cruel. In the cult's anticipation of my transformation, I had been stripped of my clothes, leaving me shivering in my boxer shorts, forced onto my hands and knees. I was hot, then cold, boiling, then freezing to death, caught between my humanity and whatever was running rampant in my blood. I was also trying really hard not to think about the custom-made crown on my head melded to my skull. The cult woman, who introduced herself as Isadora, promised I would be re-educated into a perfect, merciless king who would rule the town. I asked her why Bolivia House residents were being targeted, and that's how I ended up in chains. I was strapped to a surgical bed for what I guessed was a moon lobotomy, but apparently, asking too many questions was cause for removing my clothes and chaining me to the wall. The person I least expected to be the one performing my mental reconditioning was my best fucking friend. I didn't realize how truly weak I was until I tried to get up, tried to lunge at Kaz, who loomed over me, only to flop onto my stomach, my head spinning, my body contorting, moving under my skin. It started a few days ago, when I woke up after Kaz killed me. Somehow, the bones in my body were moving, coming apart and snapping into place, writhing around like fucking puzzle pieces. I managed to control it through sheer will, squeezing my eyes shut and clinging on to the people who mattered the most, ignoring my unraveling thoughts. The moon was already there, picking away at my skull, ready to fill my brain and intoxicate my thoughts. So, I blocked her out. I was under the slightly childish assumption that if I cannot see it, then it can't hurt me. Unfortunately, I couldn't keep my composure when my roommate knelt in front of me, cradling my cheeks. For a fleeting moment, I believed he cared, believed he might actually break me out. But then I saw his eyes filled with her, polluted and bright and drowning his pupils. Imogen once told me we were beautiful, and I think I believed her. She was coping with her physical transformation, trying to kid herself into believing that we were not monsters. But Imogen was right. The pale light dancing in my iris and transforming my face into a grotesque thing of beauty was something I could hold on to. But Kaz? Fuck. I found myself intoxicated by that light in his eyes every full moon. I really tried to accept that this version of my best friend was beautiful too. But now, I was just staring at a hollowed-out corpse still bleeding moonlight. It wasn't just his eyes. Kaz's face had begun to contort, caught in some freaky transition between human and something else. I could see the feral parts of him, the monstrous parts igniting in his bones. The way he crouched, primed on his toes, head inclined like a wild animal assessing its meal. It was still him, and yet bathed in that intense light filtering through the skylight, I couldn't call him human. When he tipped his head back, tendrils of moonlight creeping across the whites of his eyes and spiderwebbing under his skin set my own body shuffling back, jerking against his iron grip around my face. This is what we were, I thought dizzily. What Nin saw when she looked at us. Except back then, I could still delude myself into believing I was human. Kaz made me realize I wasn't. Perched in front of me, a child's skull resting on his head of curls, beads of red running down his moonlit skin, Kaz Delacroix was no longer human. When his lips pulled back into a grin, I glimpsed incisors, sharp and unnaturally long, extending from his guns. You've gotta be fucking kidding me. I couldn't resist a laugh, which sputtered into a cough. I spat blood and his hands glided across my face, gentle fingers caressing my cheeks. When I was a kid, or rather, when I was 18 and discovering myself, I fell for the asshole from the second I met him. Maybe not in the way you would think at first. I firmly believed that soulmates existed. Freshman year, I was the frat boy standing on one leg in the pouring rain for my hazing ritual. 18-year-old Kaz Delacroix walked past me, his eyes glued to his phone, thick reddish curls poking out from under his hood. I asked him for water. It was kind of an inside joke with the frat guys. We asked passerby for water and then hurled insults at them when these kids refused. After an uncomfortable silence, he paused, walked over to me, and handed me his half-empty bottle of orange soda. He barely even looked me in the eye, shoving it in my face, muttering, "Keep it." I snatched the bottle. "I said water," I snapped, downing the whole thing. "Soda is all I've got." I wasn't allowed to talk to other kids, unless I was insulting them. Whatever. Instead of taking the bottle back, he threw his Adventure Time sweater over my shoulders, immediately taking me off guard. It took me a moment to register this kid actively trying to help me before I snapped. "I don't want your corny fucking sweater," I spat, stumbling on one leg. That was a lie. I was freezing to death, and Kaz's corny fucking sweater was an instant relief. The next day, I must have been either drugged or suffering a head injury, because I stood in the exact same place, struggling on one leg, despite my successful acceptance into the group. Kaz appeared again, and to my surprise, he had 2 iced coffees. I told him to fuck off because I was an asshole, and he invited me back to his dorm to play video games. 3 weeks later, I came to the humbling realization that my boys were fucking idiots, and I was just looking for company. I moved out of the frat house and crashed with Kaz. And now look where we were. 23 years old, and my boy was a king. When I tugged away, unable to resist a hiss, his hands went to the chains wrapped around my wrists, slipping his fingers under the metal prongs, slicing into my flesh. "I'm sorry, Rowan," Kaz sighed. "If it were up to me, you wouldn't be down here." You left me for a moment and came back, dragging along a half-dead version of Nin. "It's not her," he said, shoving Nin to her knees and plunging a blade into her heart, taking it for himself. I had never felt territorial. More so always thought it was an animal thing. But when Kaz stuffed her heart into his mouth, I felt my mouth twitch, my nose flaring, a sudden overwhelming urge to lunge forward and snatch it from him. When she bled out, I was already ravenous, my body in control of my mind. I barely thought about it, already chewing through her torso and straight into her stomach. Kaz watched me, his lip curled. "It's one of her copies from the house," he said when I dove forwards like a fucking dog, mindlessly scooping up scarlet slew and stuffing it into my mouth. Kaz observed like a proud father. I'm not allowed to give you fresh Nin until you transform, Rowan. I didn't reply, couldn't reply. My mouth was having a fucking orgasm. Well, how about this? I snapped, straining against the chains. I dropped half of the emaciated head I'd been chewing on. Nin's brain was my favorite. It tasted like chicken mixed with all these different spices I couldn't name. You pull yourself together and let me go. We grab Imogen and then Nin and get the fuck out of here. Kaz's expression darkened. You do realize she's the only thing keeping us alive, and you're trying to push her out. I choked on a laugh, pushing away my meal. I was no longer hungry. Alive, I said, bitterly, spitting out a bone. I could already feel my body rejecting the meal, my gut twisting into knots. Sure. Rowan. I hated that Kaz wasn't as brainwashed as I thought. His eyes were alert, not staring straight through me or hollowed out, which meant he had willingly let her into his head. Answer me this, he whispered. Then I'll leave you alone. Enlighten me, I said, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. I tried to get up, but my body was too weak. Kaz ran his fingers through my hair, jerking my head up for me. I wasn't expecting the sudden, writhing agony crawling up and down my spine, biting every muscle. Over the last few days, I'd come to realize that movement equaled pain, and this was like an electroshock rattling my whole body. I screamed, a raw cry escaping my lips. My head snapped back, and I could feel my spine protruding from my flesh, the bones snapping and reshaping, the sickening pop of each one reforming, contorting under skin that was starting to tear. When Kaz reached out to help, I shuffled away, biting back a sob. I was coming apart, chunks of flesh peeling away. Get the fuck away from me, I gritted out, half aware of my voice dropping to a growl that wasn't mine. Go on. Explain to me how chaining me to a wall and re-educating me into a possessed freak could possibly be a good thing. To my surprise, Kaz didn't meet my gaze. Instead, he stared down at the floor. Do you remember our first death? I focused on breathing, wrapping my arms around myself. If I stayed breathing, I could stay human. I had to stay human. How could I not? I deadpanned. I got a fucking knife through my head. Something in Kaz's expression twisted and my brain was suddenly on fire. No. His voice was soft and his hands once again held my face, soothing me, pushing soaking strands of hair out of my eyes. More pain. This time in my skull, scorching pain rattling the back of my head. Like a blade had been forced through my skull, twisted into the meat of my brain. I didn't realize that I was sobbing, screaming until my roommate wrapped his arms around me. It was a ploy, and I knew it was. Because once he was close enough, so was she, bleeding from him, pooling moonlight dripping from his skin. Her melody filled my head once again, 3 single bell chimes. And the world crumbled. The floor underneath me shattered into oblivion, and I was falling, coaxed by her words dripping from my roommate's lips. I could sense her dipping into my brain, delving into my memories, entangling herself inside each one. Kaz forced my head up, and the movement sent my body into a frenzy once more, my gaze risking her light. And she was so beautiful. For a confusing moment, I could smell everything, taste every morsel on my lips, stuck to the back of my throat. I could smell the humans upstairs, sense their hearts beating in a frenzy, a vivid, blurred heartbeat thudding in the back of my skull. So mesmerizing. I found myself reaching forward, my chained hands trying to cup her into them, pulling her from the sky. No, Rowan. Her voice bled through Kaz's. I mean, our first death. The memory felt sweet, like a whole lifetime ago. I was in the back of Kaz's car, the slow, welling movements and the white noise hissing from the radio, pulling me in and out of slumber, my head bouncing against the window. It was pitch black outside and I followed a stray raindrop down the glass pane. Imogen was next to me, her head comfortably nestled in the crook of my neck. Kaz was driving, every so often twisting around and shooting me a tired smile. You okay? His voice was a low murmur, beaten by a yawn. I groaned, pressing my cheek against the cool glass of the window, trying to find some semblance of comfort. Sleeping in a moving car was impossible. Motion sickness had always stuck with me since I was a kid. Imogen drooling on my neck wasn't helping. That's the last time we spend the weekend with your parents. No offense, but your dad is a sociopath. Kaz chuckled, but he'd been unusually quiet the whole ride home. He's unique. Unique is too nice. I was about to remind Kaz of his father's interesting views on his son's relationships when Kaz suddenly slammed on the brakes, hissing through his teeth. I lurched forward, my seatbelt snapping me back just as Imogen jolted awake with a startled shriek. Kaz stopped the car and I leaned forward in my seat. What? I said, catching his frightened eyes. Kaz was gripping the wheel for dear life. What is it? But I could already see it, a silhouette dancing in the dark. Through a thick layer of fog that I had barely noticed, a shadow was standing directly in the middle of the road. Imogen planted her face in my lap. Oh my god, it's a deer. You guys are so unserious. I shot her a look. How many deers have you met with human legs? Humans with deer legs exist, Kaz whispered, tapping nervously on the wheel. Have you seen Narnia? Mr. Tumnus was a goat, Imogen hissed back. They're the same thing. Yes, but it's not a human with goat legs, I said. It's a deer with human legs. I heaved out a breath. It's Slender Woman. When Imogen responded with panicked whispering, I gently shifted her aside, unbuckling my belt. Kaz told me to stay in the car, but something drew me forwards, the glow of a perfect full moon reflecting from the fog. I hesitantly jumped out of the car and found myself face to face with a girl. She was my age, adorned in a long, white, flowing dress, ratty blonde curls obscuring her eyes. The girl was barefoot, her legs smeared with dirt. Wait. Imogen stuck her head out of the window. Isn't that Nina? She's in my economics class. She hesitated, and I heard the gentle thump of her sneakers hitting concrete. What is she doing? Relief flooded through me, and I quickened my pace. So she's not Slender Woman? I hissed. No! She's from my classes. Nina is so cute. She usually keeps to herself. So if she wasn't a ghost girl or an urban legend, why did she look like that? The girl was swaying side to side, completely out of it. Hey, I said softly. Hey, are you all right? When she didn't reply, staring straight through me, a shiver ran down my spine. Okay, 0 offense and 0 judging, I said. But why are you barefoot in the middle of nowhere? Still no response. Rowan, can you get her in the car? Kaz shouted. We'll take her back to campus. I turned back to an anxious-looking Kaz, his wide eyes lit up in the car headlights. I could have sworn that a different light, thinner, almost like a spider's silk, was dancing across his face before hitting the car window. I blinked, shaking my head. Wait, why do I have to grab the crazy girl? He grinned. Because you got out first, asshole. I ignored his laughter, gently pressing my hand on the girl's shoulder, coaxing her towards the car. She followed, to my surprise, climbing in the back seat, her eyes still devoid of life, like staring into two blank stars. When I was leaning over her to buckle her seatbelt, her body jolted suddenly, her eyes widening, a terror I didn't know or understand streaking across her face. It hit me like a wave of ice water that this girl was scared. Scared of something that wasn't me, or Kaz, and Imogen. Her frantic eyes searched the night enveloping us, unseeing, and I made the grand mistake of lightly touching her. I only reached out, grasping for her wrist, and her whole demeanor switched. In the half second it took for her half-lidded eyes to meet mine, she was swinging her fist directly into my jaw, hard enough to knock me back. The girl scrambled out of the car. What the fuck? She blinked rapidly, her lip wobbling like she had zero idea where she was. What the fuck are you doing, trying to kidnap me? Whoa. I held up my hands. Hey, it's cool, it's alright. You were in like a fugue state, and we were trying to help. The girl narrowed her eyes. You were trying to kidnap me. I bit back a nervous laugh. No, that's not... I swallowed my apology. You do realize that you're in the wrong too, right? Kaz started towards her to try and calm her down, but she was already twisting and walking away, directly into the fog. All right, nice knowing you, I yelled, nursing my jaw. I hope you get eaten by a cryptid. Rowan! Imogen chastised like I was a child. She dragged me back into the car like I was the one being the inconvenience. Irony was a beautiful fucking thing. Our new roommate, who was due to be moving in the morning, had a familiar face. For a split second, I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cringe with secondhand embarrassment. On her behalf, of course. She had cleaned up pretty well. I was already regretting not shaving and at least getting dressed before answering the door. In Imogen Prairie's words, I resembled a sewer rat when I didn't groom myself. The girl was unrecognizable. Gone was the disheveled specter resembling a ghost who had almost killed us. Now she wore casual jeans and a sweater, a leather jacket thrown over the top. I could read her almost instantly. This girl definitely Googled, "What do I wear to a room viewing?" Adorable. She actually thought we cared about her outfit. Wild strawberry blonde curls, once dangling in her face, were now tamed into a tight ponytail, highlighting what I had failed to see the night before, an angular nose and freckles speckling pale cheeks. You, she said, her lip curling. It was a crazy way to greet a potential roommate, especially when that potential roommate was your former victim. I caught a flash of amusement flicker across her eyes when I subconsciously rubbed my still sore jaw. I noticed her gaze lingering on my pajama pants and made a point of wrapping my robe tighter around myself. She snapped out of it, her eyes meeting mine. You tried to kidnap me last night. I folded my arms. I wasn't the only one, you know. You were the one who grabbed me. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Kaz said I had to be polite, but this girl was already pushing buttons I didn't know I even had. Everything about her pissed me off. The girl inclined her head. So, you're admitting that you did try to kidnap me. You were barefoot in the middle of nowhere, so naturally we wanted to help you, I said. When she opened her mouth to shoot a rebuttal, I was already on a roll. You willingly climbed into her car and punched me in the face, I deadpanned. If anyone should be apologizing, it's you. I stepped back, unable to resist waving at her. The room is closed. We're no longer accepting applicants. Her expression darkened. I can explain. Yeah, well, we don't accept cryptids, sweetheart. I winked at her, sensing her patience wearing thin. I'm sorry, what? I leaned against the doorframe, folding my arms. What were you doing last night, may I ask? You know, when you dove in front of my roommate's car like you were escaping a cult. I laughed, and catching her sudden frantic gaze, I caught myself. Wait, I said, mocking a gasp. You escaped a cult? Something in her expression seemed to twist. She curled her lip. That's none of your business. I came to see the room, and by law, you're obligated to let me in. I sucked my teeth. Okay, yeah, but you could be a brainwashed cult member. So could you! She exploded, and bam, her true colors were igniting. Aren't you a former frat boy? I rolled my eyes. Oh no, my dark past as a college freshman has been revealed. She was definitely enjoying her gotcha moment. So you were in a cult? I couldn't resist a grin. I was a frat boy, dude. I'm not the one in an actual cult. I'm not in a cult, she spat. I was dumped by my ex and I had to walk home. I nodded slowly. Sounds like something someone in a cult would say. I caught her doing the breathing technique, forcing a smile. Okay, the girl said. Rowan, I corrected her. I know we got off on the wrong foot. You slam-dunked me in the jaw. She ignored me and had the audacity to roll her eyes. I'm sorry for punching you in the face, Roman. Okay, she was doing it on purpose. Rowan, I corrected her, again. I mockingly inclined my head. You don't sound sorry. I am, though. The girl's smile widened. If I could go back, I would make sure to break your nose. Somehow, against all odds, she had won. I quickly decided that I would rather stick my head in the microwave than have this girl as a roommate. Bolivia House was chill vibes, and this girl was neither chill nor vibes. Alright then, well, aren't you just a ray of sunshine? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Goodbye. I slammed the door shut in her face, only to turn around and nearly collide with Kaz, who stood there with a towel wrapped around his head, fresh from the shower. He shook his hair, running a hand through thick curls. Who was at the door? Amazon. Any other day, Kaz would question it, but he was also high as fuck, so the guy just nodded, tugging the buttons on his new shirt. What do you think? Too formal? With him so close, I got a face full of weed breath. I shrugged. It's a shirt. I nodded at his lack of pants. You're half dressed. Kaz groaned like wearing pants was the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest. He ran back upstairs, tripping over the last step. You didn't see that! He shouted in a breathy laugh, his figure disappearing down the hall. I did! Fuck off, Rowan! The girl knocked again, this time louder. Don't answer it. I stepped in front of the door. I'm being completely serious when I say the devil is standing on our doorstep. Kaz came running back downstairs, completely ignoring me and opening the door. This time I was surprised to find a second person. Imogen Prairie, a blur of blonde curls and thrifted Prada, who looked ready to strangle me. Rowan. She was smiling, so Imogen was mad. Do you not know how to open a door? I caught the new girl's slight smirk. I was sleeping. He was just talking to me 10 seconds ago, the girl spoke up. She was definitely acting. He slammed the door in my face. Dude, what the fuck? Kaz, who was hanging over me, muttered in my ear. It's the girl who jumped in front of our car last night. I nudged him. She almost killed us. Wait, seriously? Imogen either didn't notice or didn't care. I was betting on the latter. Imogen treated potential female roommates like stray cats. She maintained a wide smile, her hands entangled with the new girl. I'm so sorry, Nina. Her laugh was a little too high, and judging from Kaz's side eye, the two of us were dead men walking. As you can see, my roommates lack basic camaraderie, so you can just ignore them for now. Like a hurricane, Imogen pushed past the two of us, dragging the new girl inside. She stopped in the hallway, shoving us against the wall. I opened my mouth to yell, ow, but was promptly gagged. Imogen's hands smelled like mint. Okay, well, reintroductions. She prodded Kaz in the chest a little too hard, and I caught the new girl trying not to laugh, which sent bubbles of laughter creeping up my throat. Amy broke into a determined grin. "Guys, this is Nina Lockhart." Before I could cut in to remind my roommates that they were inviting in a child of the devil, Imogen held up her hand to shut me up. "Nina, this is Charlie Delacroix. Also Kaz. He's a stoner vegetarian and he's like obsessed with video games and manga. He's also our unofficial official cook. Kaz is like a big brother." Kaz looked mildly offended, but he didn't speak in fear of getting his head ripped off. Imogen pulled me to her side. "Rowan Beck." She said my name like I was an enigma, and the new girl's eyes flicked to me. She was already judging me, and Imogen hadn't even properly introduced me yet. "I won't say anything about Rowan, except that he always has to be right, is totally into obscure black and white noir movies that literally no one else watches, and one time he suggested we have a threesome after winning a 48-hour game of Monopoly." Kaz made a noise that I thought was a laugh, but it sounded more like he was choking. When the new girl's eyes widened and she quickly averted her gaze, Imogen followed up with an awkward laugh. "I'm kidding. Rowan is a good boy, I promise." I could feel an uncomfortable heat spreading across my cheeks. Imogen didn't have to call me out like that, but she was also kind of maybe right. It wasn't just my drunken suggestion. We did fuck on the couch like 3 weeks earlier, completely sober, and I was definitely having conflicting feelings about my roommates. I was 21 and they were my first real relationship, if you could call it that. Kaz was seeing another guy, and Imogen was a free spirit, so neither of them wanted to label it. I think I did want to call it something, which sucked because neither of them saw it as serious. That was a miscommunication on my part. I had a thing about expressing my emotions. Blah, blah, blah. My dad left when I was a kid, blah, blah, blah. Unresolved trauma and an inability to get close to people. That was until those two came along and ruined my whole "I don't give a fuck, I'll sleep with anyone" attitude. Catching feelings sucked, especially when the two people you were maybe kind of fucking falling in love with were fine with the whole roommates with benefits vibe. A heavy silence stretched on for way longer than necessary as I watched the color drain from Imogen's face, realizing what she had just said. If I was going down, she was going down with me. The new girl straightened up, her gaze flicking to me. She looked intrigued, which was odd considering Imogen had just introduced me as a sex-obsessed sociopath. "Nina." Imogen was sweating. She was looking for someone to blame, which was crazy because she didn't have to expose our private lives within the first few minutes of meeting our new roommate. This was her fault, and I was secretly enjoying watching her squirm. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I joke a lot when I'm nervous, and I'm really nervous, and I say things that I don't mean, and I know we barely know each other, but my roommates are actually super nice." "It's Nini," the girl corrected. She was laughing, which wasn't what I expected. "Or Nin," I blurted without thinking, and this time her eyes challenged me. "If you want to shorten your name even more." I didn't mean to sound like a dick, but judging from my roommates' faces, I did. I caught her smile when Imogen grinned at her, and then her side eye at Kaz. She was definitely looking both of them up and down. But to my surprise, they were under her spell. Kaz and Imogen had zero idea of her manipulative ways. Imogen's eyes were a little too bright, Kaz's frown pricking into a smile. This girl was trying to steal my fucking roommates right in front of me. I held her gaze, flashing her a cheesy grin. She responded with a slight curl of her lips. A silent declaration of war. Against my wishes, Nini moved in as our new roommate. Initially, I kept my eye on her. Whenever she and Kaz were getting too close, or when she spent too much time with Imogen, I inserted myself into the conversation, shooting her a smile that she rebutted with that infuriating little smirk. I even made a poster, sticking it on the wall above the sink. No fraternizing, I wrote in permanent marker. No fucking, no friends with benefits, no orgies, no excuses. Nini pointed it out the next morning and had the audacity to laugh. There were multiple things about Nini Lockhart that drove me crazy. For one, she was so secretive, locking herself in her room and refusing to let anyone inside. I was still curious about the night she jumped in front of our car, but every time I crept into her room to investigate, the girl was always behind me, gently pulling me back. Nini rolled her eyes. "I'm sorry, does privacy not exist in this house?" I shrugged. "If you got nothing to hide, maybe." I left her, convinced I'd won, before a stuffed animal thwacked me in the back of my head. Ow! I ducked and grabbed the toy to lob it back at her, but she slammed the door in my face. I added abuse to the long list of reasons I did not like her. She always left the refrigerator door open, blasted music in her room when I was trying to sleep, and selfishly bought groceries only for herself, acting surprised that the world didn't revolve around her. Nini was also getting too close to Kaz and Imogen. I started stalking her, insisting on joining her for breakfast, and even inviting her to watch movies just to keep her away from my roommates. This girl acted innocent, but I wasn't fooled by her theatrics. One night, she invited me to cook dinner with her. She spent the whole time following the wrong recipe, yet she insisted she was right and refused to admit defeat, even as I read the correct one out loud right in front of her. I didn't realize I was enjoying myself until she burst out laughing, losing her composure, which set me off as well. We both ended up caught in painful hysterics until Cass stuck his head through the door and told us to be quiet. But I still didn't like her. Nin was tolerable. We played Monopoly, and she was of course a sore loser, flipping the board when she realized I was winning. Nin was a selfish, entitled, insufferable brat. And yet somehow I couldn't keep away from her. I found myself talking to her when I didn't mean to talk to her, making snide quips at everything she said in hopes of her throwing back a rebuttal. I didn't know what it was and how it felt, because this was different to Kaz and Imogen. With them, it was like a craving, a need to be wrapped around them so they would never let me go. Nin felt natural, a slow-moving thing that I wasn't sure I wanted to label. After a drunken night, however, I had no choice but to label it. Waking up naked in Nin's bed, her head resting on my shoulder, I realized I'd broken my own rules. As I tilted my head back, my eyes caught a giant oil painting of the full moon taking up the whole ceiling. So, Nin had a thing for the moon? Sitting up, her head sliding onto my chest, I found myself staring at every angle, every crater, every stage of the moon. There were newspaper clippings taped to the walls, black and white photos of people with their faces scratched out. Something snapped inside me, my blood running cold. What the fuck? When I tried to move, I couldn't. See? The moon bled into my mind, a sweet melody entangled in my thoughts. You don't remember this, do you, my darling? Her voice dripped with spite, with unbridled triumph. How on earth could you forget your first death? I was suddenly far too aware of the real world, where my body was working against me, molding me into a monster, my limbs contorting. She was biding her time, dragging me through my memories while her light entangled around my bones. This time, they didn't snap back to normal. Instead, they were reshaping, reforming themselves, a rattling cry escaping my lips that felt unreal. The memory splintered before blooming into another. This time, I was handcuffed to Nin's bed. I ripped out of my restraints and stumbled downstairs where Kaz and Imogen were tied up back to back in the lounge. She'd already marked them, carving symbols into their skin, and looking down, they covered my arms too. Before I could help them, I was violently shoved against the wall, a knife pressed to my throat. Nin was so close, her lips grazing mine. The moon was fucking with me. Before the false memory could take full control, I screamed, anchoring myself to reality. But the moon tightened her iron grip. will make you a deal," she's saying into my head. "I will show you your first death, and you will let go and take your place on the throne." Her voice grew louder over the sound of my body splintering apart. "Deal?" Reality slammed into me, and I was on what was left of my hands and knees, staring up at her, gasping for breath, my cries growing into ragged growls, my jaw prying wider and wider. When my spine snapped back, agony became something else entirely. I could feel her seeping into my skin, spiderwebbing across my eyes and slipping through my lips and ears. I wasn't aware of my mouth moving. My voice was no longer mine. My body was her puppet. "Yes," I managed to croak, my voice splintering into a sob. The moon did show me, like she'd been dangling this forgotten memory in front of me the whole time. It was sharp and quick, a series of flashes like a rewinding VCR. There were 4 shadows standing on our doorstep. Kaz stood next to me, his eyes wide. Imogen was hiding behind me, Nin grasping hold of my hand. I didn't realize how right she felt, entangled in my fingers, until she squeezed my wrist reassuringly. "Leave," Kaz spoke up, directed at the shadows. "Sorry, but we're not interested." I stepped forward to slam the door in their faces, but the bang shattered my ears. Kaz dropped to the ground, and I was petrified. Bang. Imogen crumpled into a heap, and Nin screamed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe as one shadow stepped forward, and I felt ice-cold metal protruding into my forehead. What's funny is that I didn't even feel my first death. How pathetically human it truly was. There was no cult, no knife through the skull, no sacrificing my shadow to appease a starving god. No. It was so human. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I waited for the memory to end, for the moon to pull me from my own mind and force me to keep my side of the deal. But she didn't. I could still sense her bleeding inside me. And yet the memory did not stop. "Rowan!" Nin's cry cut through the darkness, and I could feel myself being dragged through dirt. My eyes were open, but I couldn't move, my gaze fixed on a perfect full moon. Nin's hands were wrapped around my ankles, and with another pull, I was slipping into ice-cold water, my body half submerged in the town lake. I could see Nin, her shadow dropping beside me. But I couldn't feel her hands cradling my face, her breath tickling my cheeks. "Stay with me," she whispered, slapping me across the face. "I'm going to save you, all right? All of you. I promise." Her voice broke. "You just need to trust me, okay?" Nin brushed the hair out of my eyes, her fingers tiptoeing across my skin. "Trust me." Her eyes didn't make sense, so bright yet devoid of life. "I know it won't make sense right now, and I know you'll hate me, but you're going to be okay." She kept repeating it to herself, her hands slick with my blood, forcing me to look at her. Nin leaned forward and kissed me, her shaky breaths grazing my lips, her trembling fingers forcing my eyes open. When she rolled me onto my side, there were claw marks in the dirt, symbols I couldn't read carved into the grass. She scooped Kaz up into her arms, Kaz with a bullet hole in his head, his limp arms dangling, and threw him into the water. Gathering up Imogen, a blur of blood-stained curls and fluffy pajamas, she dropped her in too. I was next. Nin was gentle with me, rolling me into the shadows, my body slipping under the water.
"How selfish,"
the moon whispered into my head.
"Look what she did to you. She gave you to me, sweet boy. I wouldn't be here without her."
The moon's words grounded me back to the real world. This time I had an audience, and I didn't even hear my own screams, my wails for death, the sound of my muscles tearing apart.
Do you not hear me, Rowan?
The moon's voice was soft, sultry.
She gave you to me, body, mind, and soul.
She saved us, I thought, my thoughts spiraling. But that wasn't true. Nin didn't fucking save us. She turned us into monsters.
Exactly.
The moon's voice was soothing, almost motherly.
How dare she? Does she even realize what she's done? And to throw away her own memories to stop her own pain? Sweet Rowan, how could she be so self-centered?
She wanted to forget?
Yes. Nina asked me to purge her memories, taking away everything, even knowledge of her own involvement. She carved your souls into the ground, into the walls of your home, allowing me, when the time was right, to send my followers to take what was mine.
Nin's scream echoing in my head.
Yes, please bring them back.
The moon's confirmation snapped something inside me. I felt myself go limp, my head hanging.
I can make you a king, Rowan.
The moon sighed. She laughed, feeling so real, whispering directly into my skull.
Sorry, you don't want to be a king, which is a pity.
I couldn't move my mouth anymore, my body screeching for mercy. Changing, contorting. I held on to human words which began to tangle. You gave her what she wanted. I thought, the chains wrapped around my limbs that felt bulging, wrong, and monstrous, snapped apart. It was so hard to think straight. Suddenly my thoughts were blurred and dancing, a hellish red glow streaking across my writhing vision.
Of course,
the moon said.
I will grant anything.
Let me... Fuck. I couldn't think. Couldn't... Let me... fucking... die. The moon was in front of me. So bright, so beautiful. A being I couldn't comprehend. Her hands were gentle, grasping my face that was no longer human, no longer mine, moving slowly, gripping under my chin and the top of my head. In a single, jerking movement, she forced me to look at her.
The reluctant king wants to sleep.
Yes. Her hands disappeared and my eyes were full of light. So beautiful.
Then let go, child.
I did. And in those seconds it took for me to give in. Every part of me, body, mind, and soul. Every last fleeting part of myself I was holding on to. Splintered. The second chain snapped and I was on my hands and knees again, but this time I was whole. Her light bathed me and I reveled in it, in her, having the grace to offer me a place next to her where I would rule. By her side.
You are going to make her suffer,
the moon sang inside my shattering mind. The words contorted my brain, and when my lips split open, elongated sharp points spiked my tongue. My brain was boiling, my body going hot and cold until I was screaming, hysterical bubbles of laughter climbing up my throat. I couldn't think, but
Thinking was bad. I wasn't allowed to think. Yes. Tipping my head back, my bones snapped into place and my vision filled with light, an animalistic snarl ripping from my lips. My final thought was raging fire, unbridled pleasure warping my brain into hers. Yes, I was going to be king. And yes, I was going to make her suffer.